In 1945, World War II ended. The bombs stopped falling, treaties were signed, and, the citizens of the United Kingdom breathed this massive collective sigh of relief.
Right. The war was finally over.
Exactly. But the emergency digital tracking IDs, the era's equivalent of like comprehensive identity cards, which were introduced strictly to catch German spies, those stayed active.
Oh, yeah. They didn't just turn them off.
No, not at all. The government actually didn't deactivate that surveillance network until 1952.
Wow. 7 years later?
Yeah. Because, once a system learns how to watch you, it rarely closes its eyes voluntarily.
That is a very unsettling point.
It is. And today, we are tearing down the hidden walls of our modern digital panopticon. So welcome, everyone. If you're listening to this, I'm talking directly to you, the learner.
Glad to have you with us.
We know you're here because you're just insanely curious about the hidden forces shaping our world. And today, we have a mission that is going to, fundamentally rewire how you view your digital footprint.
It really will. We've got some incredible source material today.
We do. Our map for this journey is a really fascinating interview excerpt from a show called Talks on Tap.
Right, the one featuring the developer, Stephen.
Exactly. Stephen is a privacy tech developer, the CEO of Margin Syndicate, and a platform called 0xNull.io.
Which is just a totally fascinating project.
It really is. So we're going to unpack the philosophical and, the highly technical battle over our digital data.
Yeah, we'll explore how these innocuous little breadcrumbs we leave online became this massive attack vector.
Right, and why the early utopian ideals of the internet are just completely clashing with modern surveillance.
And, of course, how developers are building this clean tech that flat out refuses to collect your information.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the architecture of modern privacy, we have to look at the original blueprints of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, going way back.
Back when it was an ideological weapon rather than, just a Wall Street asset class.
The ideological roots are completely unrecognizable when you look at the space today. The early cypherpunk ethos of cryptocurrency, it was driven by classical liberals, libertarians, anarcho-capitalists.
Right, the real early adopters.
Exactly. Their goal, going all the way back to the cryptographic mailing lists of the 1990s, was the absolute separation of money and state.
They really believed financial privacy was a prerequisite for an open society.
They did. The blockchain was literally conceived as a decentralized tool for sovereign individuals to transact, without relying on centralized banks or government fiat.
But Stephen points out this stark, almost painful contrast with today's landscape.
It was night and day.
Because the current crypto ecosystem is just heavily dominated by Wall Street ETFs. You've got massive institutional inflows from entities like BlackRock and all this Silicon Valley venture capital.
That's totally corporate now.
It feels a bit like, it's like watching a fiercely independent underground punk band, right?
Yeah. The ones playing illegal basement shows.
Exactly. They build this cult following in basements, only to eventually sign with a massive corporate conglomerate.
Right, and now they're doing stadium tours sponsored by the very multinational banks they wrote angry songs about.
Perfect way to put it. The aesthetic is the same, but the underlying machine is entirely different.
It really is. And Stephen has this very provocative definition of what Bitcoin has actually become as a result of all this financialization.
Yeah, he doesn't even view it as a currency anymore.
Not at all. He calls it a liquidity sponge.
A liquidity sponge. That's a great term.
And what's fascinating here is the empirical market data he uses to back up that theory. He notes that Bitcoin currently has roughly a 60% correlation with the NASDAQ.
Specifically the QQQ ETF, right? Which tracks all those top-heavy tech stocks.
Exactly. Meanwhile, its correlation with gold is sitting around a mere 12%.
Wow, only 12%.
Yeah, so structurally, on a macroeconomic level, Bitcoin is just not acting like digital gold.
Right, it's not acting as an independent, uncorrelated inflation hedge at all.
No, institutional algorithms are basically trading it like a high beta tech stock. They've effectively turned it into leveraged NASDAQ.
So it just absorbs excess fiat liquidity sloshing around the traditional financial system.
That's exactly it. It's just a sponge.
But taking that a step further, if it's just moving in lockstep with tech stocks, that completely shatters the original cypherpunk dream of a sovereign parallel economy.
It really does.
Yeah.
But Stephen makes the argument that the original vision of Satoshi Nakamoto didn't necessarily die.
Right. It just migrated to a different technological architecture.
Exactly. He points to Monero as the true heir to that peer-to-peer cash vision.
And to really understand why he says that, we have to dig into the mechanics of fungibility.
Yeah, fungibility is the absolute bedrock of a functional currency. It means every single unit is indistinguishable from another in value and utility.
Like if I hand you a crisp, newly minted $20 bill, and you hand me a crumpled, torn $20 bill that has circulated through 100 different cash registers,
Mm.
they both still buy exactly $20 worth of goods.
Exactly. The merchant doesn't care about the history of the paper.
But mainstream crypto, and specifically Bitcoin, has entirely lost this property at the protocol layer.
Totally. Because Bitcoin operates on a completely transparent ledger. Every single transaction, mapping all the way back to the Genesis block, is permanently and publicly recorded.
Which means analytics firms can trace the exact lineage of every fraction of a Bitcoin sitting in any wallet.
Right. And that transparency creates this totally bifurcated market. Stephen highlights this concept of dirty Bitcoin versus virgin Bitcoin.
Virgin Bitcoin, meaning it has no history.
Exactly. Institutional buyers who have these really strict compliance mandates, they will often pay a premium for newly mined Bitcoins.
Because they want completely clean assets.
Right. Conversely, if a Bitcoin is passed through a wallet associated with like a hack or a darknet market or has just been flagged by a government agency, it becomes tainted.
It's a dirty coin.
Yeah. Major exchanges will literally refuse to accept deposits of these coins, effectively freezing them out of the primary market.
So the people holding those flagged coins are basically forced to sell them at a steep discount on secondary, over-the-counter markets just to get rid of them.
Right. So the fundamental rule of currency breaks down. One Bitcoin no longer equals one Bitcoin.
The value is entirely dependent on its public history.
Exactly. But Monero operates on a completely different cryptographic foundation. Privacy is built into the base layer.
Because it obfuscates the sender, the receiver, and the transaction amount mathematically?
Yes. The network guarantees that there is just no visible history to analyze. Therefore, a dirty Monero cannot exist.
One Monero always perfectly equals one Monero.
Right. It preserves that essential property of true peer-to-peer cash that Bitcoin basically abandoned in favor of radical transparency.
But, this loss of fungibility in the broader crypto market wasn't an accident.
No, not at all.
It's the direct result of a massive, coordinated infrastructure designed to track users at every entry and exit point.
Yeah, we've normalized handing over our digital passports just to participate in decentralized finance.
Right. Let's trace how we all became these heavily monitored data points, starting with the origins of KYC regulations.
Yeah, KYC, or Know Your Customer, is the regulatory mandate forcing financial institutions and crypto exchanges to verify the identity of their users.
Right. Before you can trade, you have to upload your government ID, provide a proof of address, and honestly, often submit to a live facial recognition scan now.
It's intense. In the Talks on Tap interview, they bring up this really fascinating historical anecdote from Bruce Fenton that illuminates how drastically this concept has mutated.
Yeah, because originally, KYC frameworks were incredibly narrow.
Right. They were designed specifically to target politically exposed persons.
Which, honestly, the initial logic makes sense on paper. You have high-level politicians, international diplomats, their immediate associates.
People who are statistically at a much higher risk for bribery, state-level corruption, large-scale money laundering.
Yeah. Monitoring the capital flows of people actually holding the levers of state power is a pretty reasonable anti-corruption measure.
But systems of surveillance are subject to an inevitable gravitational pull, right? Scope creep.
Oh, the dreaded scope creep.
Yeah. Bureaucratic agencies, in their pursuit of total systemic security, they just slowly widened the definition of who needed to be monitored.
Year by year, the net gets cast slightly wider.
Exactly. It encompassed more tiers of the financial system until eventually it captured every single everyday citizen just opening a basic checking account or buying $50 worth of Ethereum on a mobile app.
This perfectly mirrors that UK digital ID example we opened with. The tools built for wartime espionage just seamlessly transitioned into peacetime civilian management.
Right. They never turn it off. And Stevens' perspective is heavily influenced by modern examples of this overreach.
Yeah, the interview touches on the social credit system in China, noting the severe realities for citizens who are algorithmic outliers.
Which the source points out can lead to restricted access to basic societal functions like travel or housing.
And again, we're just reporting what they discussed. We're not taking a stance here. But they also point to aggressive fiscal proposals in the West.
Right, like the idea of taxing unrealized gains.
Yeah, which is a major talking point right now. And the source argues that doing that would require the state to have perfect, real-time visibility into the fluctuating value of literally every asset a citizen holds.
Exactly. Stephen's underlying philosophy here is rooted in a deep distrust of these massive centralized control structures.
He views these global trends not as like isolated political policies, but as a cohesive tightening of a digital snare around the individual.
And that is the core psychological motivation driving the development of uncompromising privacy tech.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Even if we acknowledge the reality of scope creep, isn't some level of KYC inherently necessary to maintain a functioning society?
Well, that's the standard argument, yeah.
Right. If we completely remove the bouncer from the nightclub, doesn't the club just immediately get overrun by criminals and malicious actors? Don't we need verified identities to prevent illicit funding and fraud?
So that is absolutely the consensus regulatory view. But Stephen flips that mental model completely upside down.
How so?
He argues that KYC doesn't protect the user at all. He says it actively puts the everyday user at exponentially greater risk.
By forcing them to hand over their data.
Exactly. By demanding that millions of citizens upload their passports, physical addresses, and financial histories to centralized servers, regulators are forcing the creation of massive metadata honeypots.
And those honeypots are just irresistible targets for hackers.
Bingo. Stephen points to a specific breach involving Companies House in the UK, where sensitive corporate and personal data was just completely compromised.
And we see this constantly on a global scale. Credit bureaus, telecom providers, crypto exchanges, they are breached relentlessly.
All the time. When these centralized databases are cracked, the very identity data that was supposedly collected to keep the financial system secure is weaponized against the public.
Right. Users face identity theft, targeted phishing attacks, and in some cases, actual physical security risks.
Because their home addresses and net worth have literally been leaked to the dark web.
So relying on the bouncer analogy, it's like the bouncer isn't just looking at your ID to make sure you're of age.
Right.
The bouncer is making a high-resolution photocopy of your driver's license, writing down your social security number, tossing it into a cardboard box in the back alley.
Yeah, and eventually an organized syndicate just drives by and steals the entire box.
Yeah.
That captures the structural flaw perfectly. Holding metadata makes an organization a target, and when they fail to protect it, the user is the one who pays the price.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this realization is really the foundational architectural principle behind Stephen's platform 0xNull. The name itself is literally a technological manifesto.
Let's break down that nomenclature. So 0x is the standard prefix used in computer science to denote a hexadecimal number.
Right, and it's ubiquitous in crypto. Virtually every Ethereum wallet address starts with 0x.
And null implies a value of absolutely zero.
Exactly, and the .io is just the standard domain suffix for tech startups.
So 0xNull is an entity designed to capture, generate, and store zero metadata.
It is a total commitment to a null state. And this strict adherence to the null state dictates every single engineering choice he makes.
Yeah, in the interview, the hosts press him on a critical point. They ask, why build exclusively on Monero?
Right, why not integrate highly liquid, widely used stablecoins like USDC or utilize other privacy-focused networks like Zcash?
And here's where it gets really interesting, because Stephen's answer relies on this concept of implied metadata.
Right, if a platform integrates a stablecoin, those tokens exist on public ledgers like Ethereum or Tron.
So even if the platform itself tries not to collect data, the underlying network broadcasts the transaction graph to the whole world.
Exactly. But Stephen's critique of Zcash is even more nuanced.
Yeah, because Zcash offers optional privacy, right?
Yes. Users can execute transparent transactions, which look just like Bitcoin, or shielded transactions, which use zero-knowledge proofs to hide the details.
But Stephen argues that the very act of moving capital from a transparent pool into a shielded pool creates an anomaly. It's the mechanical equivalent of, like, walking into a crowded, noisy room and suddenly switching to a whisper.
Exactly. The content of the whisper might be perfectly encrypted, but the sudden change in behavior is a massive red flag.
Because blockchain analytics firms just monitor those transition points.
Yeah, the fact that you shielded the funds is, in itself, a highly valuable piece of implied metadata.
Which is why Monero is literally his only option. Monero makes metadata collection mathematically impossible at the base protocol level.
Right. When you send a transaction, the network employs ring signatures.
which means your digital signature is cryptographically mixed with a group of other random past transactions pulled from the blockchain.
So to an outside observer, the math proves that one of the signers in the ring is valid, but it provides absolutely zero probability weight as to which one is the actual sender.
And Stephen also discusses an upcoming network upgrade called Dandelion,
Yeah,
right?
Dandelion is huge. It changes how transactions are broadcast to nodes, effectively breaking the link between a user's IP address and the transaction they generate.
Okay, so the infrastructure relies on this foundational layer of perfect cryptographic darkness.
Yes.
But from a user experience standpoint, how do you actually interact with the platform if there are no user accounts?
It's tricky.
Because you can't just have a login portal with a username and password if your goal is the null state.
You utilize sophisticated routing architecture instead of custody. 0xNull doesn't hold user funds or maintain internal ledgers of who owns what.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. If a user wants to swap an asset, say, they want to trade Uniswap's UNI token for Monero, they don't create an account.
Right.
The 0xNull interface connects directly to decentralized non-KYC swap providers like Trocador or XLX.
So the user generates a temporary single-use proxy wallet. They send their UNI to that proxy address.
Exactly. The smart contract automatically detects the deposit, routes the funds through the swap provider, executes the trade, and sends the newly minted Monero directly back to the user's private wallet.
It's like buying a coffee with cash from a barista who's wearing a blindfold.
That's a great way to think about it.
The transaction happens, the value is exchanged, but neither party knows or records who the other is. The routing layer retains no memory of the event, no IP logs, and no persistent account data tying the input to the output.
None at all.
Okay, so Stephen has successfully engineered this incredibly secure, dark, accountless void. But what are people actually doing inside of it? What do the mechanics of these anonymous markets look like in practice?
Well, the first major application discussed is a decentralized lending platform. Stephen has built a bridge connecting anonymous Monero wallets to Aave.
And Aave is one of the premier lending protocols in the broader DeFi ecosystem.
Right. But Aave operates on public, transparent blockchains.
So how do you bridge the mathematically dark world of Monero into a transparent lending pool without immediately compromising the user's privacy?
This is achieved through a tool called Railgun, which deploys zero-knowledge proofs.
Right. And just to clarify, a zero-knowledge proof is a cryptographic method where one party can prove to another party that a specific statement is true without revealing any additional information.
Exactly. So in this context, Railgun allows a user to prove to the Aave smart contract that they have deposited sufficient collateral to take out a loan without ever revealing the specific wallet address that holds the funds.
But bridging those two worlds, like maintaining a zero-knowledge shield while interacting with a public smart contract that requires immense computational overhead.
Oh, massive overhead. And the interview notes that this friction comes with a tangible cost.
A steep cost, right?
Very steep. Railgun charges a 0.25% unshielding fee based on the total transaction volume.
Wow. So if a user is moving a significant amount of capital into a lending pool just to earn a few percentage points of yield over a year, losing 0.25% upfront simply to maintain operational privacy is a massive barrier to entry.
It's a huge hurdle.
Which makes me wonder about the long-term viability of this model. I mean, if Stephen refuses to raise venture capital for a marketing budget,
Right.
and the users who do organically discover the platform are penalized with hefty shielding fees just for basic lending, doesn't this relegate privacy tech to being a clunky luxury good?
Like a niche product.
Yeah, a niche product only utilized by the hyper-paranoid who are willing to pay a premium for invisibility.
Stephen is acutely aware of this friction. He characterizes 0xNull not as, a hyper-growth startup seeking to disrupt the market overnight, but as a slow-burn philosophical project.
A slow burn.
Yeah. He is methodically building and refining the infrastructure, waiting for a tipping point. He believes the pain and consequences of systemic surveillance will eventually outweigh the financial friction of using privacy tools.
But to drive engagement in the meantime, he has built other markets that don't rely on those expensive zero-knowledge bridges.
Exactly. That's where the prediction markets come into play.
And prediction markets have just exploded into the mainstream recently.
Oh, totally.
They're platforms where users can wager on geopolitical outcomes, election results, cultural events. But the major players in that space, like Polymarket or Kalshi, are heavily backed by venture capital.
And because they have massive fiduciary obligations to their investors, those platforms often act as market makers.
Meaning they utilize automated market maker algorithms, or they take the opposite side of a user's trade to ensure there is always deep liquidity.
Right, they function similarly to a traditional casino house, carrying risk to facilitate volume. But 0xNull completely abandons that model in favor of pari-mutuel pools.
Can you explain the mechanics of a pari-mutuel pool in this context?
Sure. In a pari-mutuel setup, the platform assumes zero risk and provides zero liquidity. It is a pure peer-to-peer winner-takes-all mechanism.
Okay.
So if a market opens on a specific event, all the users backing outcome A deposit their Monero into one smart contract bucket. All the users backing outcome B deposit into a second bucket.
And then when the event concludes,
The winning side simply splits the entire cumulative total of the losing side's bucket, distributed proportionally based on their initial stake.
and what if the event results in a draw or is canceled?
The smart contract automatically refunds everyone's initial deposit. 0xNull never touches the capital and never trades against its users.
That's incredibly clean. But do they make any money?
The only revenue the platform generates is a microscopic 0.4% VIG or vigorish, deducted exclusively from the profits of the winning pool.
Wow, 0.4%. So the vast majority of the capital remains perfectly peer-to-peer. The underlying mechanics are elegant, but the actual markets they spin up are just wonderfully chaotic.
They really are. They run these automated prediction pools off simple data feeds, and they offer markets on everything from standard athletics to massive esports tournaments.
Yeah, Steven mentioned specifically pulling data for Dota and Counter-Strike, noting the appeal of users anonymously placing stakes while watching the live Twitch streams of the matches.
They also run highly niche governance markets, where users wager on complex protocol developments like predicting whether Bitcoin developers will successfully implement specific soft forks to defend against future quantum computing threats.
But the hosts of the podcast are most captivated by the combat sports markets.
Oh yeah.
Steven utilizes Oracle feeds to resolve wagers on incredibly visceral underground events.
Bare-knuckle brawls taking place in rings made of hay bales in Eastern Europe.
Or those highly controversial Dana White slap fighting championships that have gone viral online.
There is something profoundly surreal about it. You have this uncompromising, cryptographically dense, military-grade privacy architecture.
Right.
And it's being utilized by people to anonymously bet on two guys slapping each other unconscious.
It is the ultimate manifestation of internet culture.
It really is. But it serves a vital strategic purpose for Steven. He isn't building these tools exclusively for whistleblowers, dissidents, or political activists.
No, his goal is the total normalization of privacy.
He describes his ultimate vision as a marketplace, where an ordinary person can quietly knit a pair of socks, list them on his platform, and sell them to a buyer across the world for Monero, completely outside the view of the panopticon.
He wants mundane, everyday commerce to be inherently dark.
Exactly.
But if you are building an ecosystem specifically designed to operate outside the panopticon, you are inherently positioning yourself as an adversary to the entities constructing that panopticon.
That's the undeniable reality of it.
Which forces us to zoom out to the macro level. We need to look at the global chessboard and the asymmetric warfare between privacy tech and state surveillance.
The participants in the interview are highly lucid about the scale of the opposition. They know they are a decentralized collective of coders going up against multi-trillion-dollar sovereign infrastructures.
They spend significant time analyzing the major players in global data aggregation. And one of the hosts casually drops a staggering detail.
Yeah, they mentioned they previously worked on the UK National Census in 2010.
And the primary contractor handling the massive ingestion of civilian demographic data was Lockheed Martin.
Lockheed Martin, one of the largest defense and aerospace contractors on the planet, managing the domestic census.
The line between civilian administration and the military-industrial complex is functionally non-existent.
It really is blurred. They also dissect the role of companies like Palantir and its CEO, Alex Karp.
Right. Palantir specializes in ingesting unimaginably vast, disparate data sets, financial records, communication logs, geospatial intelligence,
and synthesizing them into actionable surveillance profiles for intelligence agencies.
To visualize how this tracking actually works on the blockchain, you can look at firms like Chainalysis.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Think of it like a bank robber slipping a die pack into a bag of stolen cash. When the pack explodes, the ink doesn't just stain the initial bills. It stains the hands of the robber, the counter of the convenience store where they buy a coffee, the cash register drawer, and the hands of the next 5 customers who receive that tainted cash as change.
Chainalysis essentially maps the spread of that digital ink.
Exactly. They use heuristic algorithms to connect a single known entity, like an exchange where you uploaded your passport, to every subsequent wallet address your funds touch, illuminating the entire network graph.
And this integration of advanced tech and state power is only accelerating. The interview highlights how frontier AI companies like Anthropic are increasingly interfacing with defense departments.
To model strategic scenarios and generate war plans, the digital tools of analysis are becoming explicit tools of kinetic statecraft.
Now, the source material also navigates the political theater surrounding these technologies. Again, we are just reporting the views from the source here, neutrally.
Absolutely.
They discuss U.S. Senator Bill Foster as a prime example of the cognitive dissonance in government.
The hosts point out that Senator Foster is actually highly technically literate. He deeply understands the underlying mathematics of zero-knowledge proofs and advanced encryption.
Yet publicly, he aggressively campaigns against the use of crypto mixers and privacy tools.
And the consensus in the interview is that this stance is entirely performative.
Right. They argue he recognizes that technology is merely a neutral mathematical tool. But the optics of his political position require him to project a hardline stance against financial obfuscation.
They also examine the cultural implications of metadata through an anecdote involving conservative commentator Candace Owens.
Yeah, she highlighted an incident regarding Charlie Kirk, demonstrating how the EXIF data attached to a digital photograph can be spoofed.
Right. For those who don't know, EXIF data is the hidden metadata recording the precise GPS coordinates and timestamp of the image. And it can be easily manipulated by malicious actors to fabricate narratives or frame individuals.
Stephen seizes on this point to reinforce his core thesis. If metadata can be weaponized or artificially generated to cause harm, the only mathematically secure defense is a system where the metadata fundamentally does not exist.
A completely null state cannot be spoofed.
Exactly. From a regulatory standpoint, they do point to a rare moment of legal clarity, though.
Oh, right. They reference a specific report from the U.S. Treasury associated with official Scott Bessent.
Yes. That report explicitly conceded that the mere utilization of a crypto mixing service is entirely legal.
Because the cryptographic tool itself is neutral under the law, it is the underlying intent of the user that dictates criminality.
Despite that legal nuance, the developers express a profound alienation from Western regulatory regimes.
They view jurisdictions like Dubai as far more pragmatic.
The argument presented is that Dubai actively attempts to align the strategic economic needs of the state with the commercial desires of its residents, fostering a highly favorable environment for technological innovation.
And they contrast this sharply with the West, where they perceive a sprawling surveillance apparatus that operates entirely decoupled from the actual desires of the citizenry.
Which leads them to a fascinating geographic prediction. They suggest that the real epicenter for the mass adoption of decentralized private finance won't be in North America or Europe.
They are looking directly at Africa.
Specifically, highlighting the massive, technologically native youth demographics in Nigeria and Kenya.
To understand this, we really have to look at the historical precedent of M-Pesa in Kenya.
Oh, M-Pesa is a perfect example.
Long before Bitcoin even existed, Kenyans facing an underdeveloped banking sector began using prepaid Safaricom mobile phone minutes as a de facto peer-to-peer currency, trading value via SMS.
They organically built a decentralized mobile money network strictly out of necessity.
And today, facing severe inflation of local fiat currencies, this same demographic is seamlessly transitioning to digital assets and stablecoins.
They aren't treating crypto as a speculative gamble. They are adopting it rapidly as a vital tool for economic survival and capital preservation.
It's a massive continent-wide shift born out of pure necessity.
It truly is.
But bringing the focus back down from the geopolitical level to the individual developer-building technology that actively subverts the surveillance capabilities of defense contractors and hostile regulatory bodies seems like an impossibly heavy burden.
It's an immense amount of pressure.
How does a single developer actually operate under that pressure? Let's get into the granular philosophy of clean tech and OPSEC.
Yeah, OPSEC, or operational security, is the methodical practice of identifying and protecting individual, seemingly innocuous pieces of data.
Because if aggregated, they could give an adversary the bigger picture.
Right. For a developer like Steven, OPSEC isn't a feature he bolts onto his software at the end. It is the fundamental physics of his daily life and his code base.
So what does this all mean when you look at the actual architecture of 0xNull?
It translates into a rigid adherence to the principle of a minimal attack surface. We discussed his refusal to collect user metadata because it turns the platform into a honeypot.
Right.
But this philosophy extends to the very server infrastructure. Stephen actively avoids deploying complex, highly experimental smart contracts whenever he can.
Because in software engineering, complexity is the absolute enemy of security.
Exactly. Every novel function, every unnecessary line of code is a potential backdoor or exploit waiting to be discovered by a sophisticated hacker.
Instead, he relies on foundational, battle-tested architecture. He utilizes simple Unix servers.
And Unix operating systems have been tested in the absolute fires of the early internet for over 3 decades.
The vulnerabilities are known, the architecture is incredibly stable, and it requires very little active maintenance.
He strings these servers together using cron jobs, which are just basic time-based scheduling scripts that execute commands automatically.
So he is meticulously building a machine designed to run perfectly in the dark without requiring him to ever manually intervene or log in.
And Stephen is unsparing in his critique of other high-profile projects that he feels compromise on this clean tech ethos.
Yeah. The interview details his deep skepticism of several major protocols. He calls out Aztec, which is a highly regarded, privacy-centric Layer 2 network built on Ethereum.
Right. While he respects their implementation of zero-knowledge compute technology, he fundamentally rejects their underlying account-based model.
Because it still utilizes persistent accounts, it still generates metadata, and for Stephen, any metadata leak is a catastrophic failure of the null state.
He also takes aim at the secret network, which is designed to provide data privacy for smart contracts.
And his critique there centers on their hardware assumptions, doesn't it?
Yes. They rely on trusted execution environments, or TEEs, specifically utilizing Intel SGX secure enclaves on the CPU.
But Stephen argues that trusting a major U.S. hardware manufacturer like Intel, whose chips have a long history of side-channel vulnerabilities and theoretical state-level backdoors, completely negates the cypherpunk model.
Exactly. If the physical silicon processing your encryption keys is compromised by an intelligence agency, the cryptographic math layered on top of it is totally irrelevant.
He even questions the corporate alignment of Proton Mail, which is widely considered by the public to be the absolute gold standard for encrypted communications.
Yeah, he points out that Proton Mail has hired marketing executives associated with the World Economic Forum.
And for a developer fiercely dedicated to an anarcho-capitalist framework, aligning corporately with an organization that frequently advocates for centralized global governance and standardized digital IDs.
It's an irreconcilable breach of trust in his eyes.
But I have to push back on this entirely. Listening to the sheer paranoia required to maintain this posture, it sounds like an incredibly isolating, almost suffocating way to live and build.
It definitely sounds intense.
You reject venture capital because they demand user analytics. You reject traditional marketing because it relies on tracking pixels. You refuse to collect a single email address.
Right, which means when you push a massive update to your platform, you have absolutely no way to contact your users to tell them about it.
You are essentially building a masterpiece in total darkness, entirely alone, just hoping that people organically stumble across your pristine Unix servers.
It really is the digital equivalent of a monastic life. It requires an extraordinary degree of internal conviction to build without the constant feedback loops and dopamine hits of modern tech development.
That's to be lonely.
But the interview offers a really poignant glimpse into how Stephen processes that isolation. It's found in his personal routine.
Right.
When he is deep in the trenches, hardening his servers against potential state-level adversaries, he isn't sitting in a state of terrified silence. He zones out by flooding his environment with music.
He specifically mentions listening to aggressive, dark technos, citing the Belgian producer Amélie Lens and heavily rhythmic British grime music, like Skepta.
There is something incredibly poetic about that image. This solitary developer, isolated from the corporate tech world, headphones on, blasting dark techno, methodically writing code to build an unhackable off-ramp for humanity.
Because that is precisely the scale at which he views his work. He explicitly states in the interview that he considers his code to be a high-minded contribution to humanity.
He looks at the macro trajectory of surveillance, the integration of defense contractors with civilian data, the push for biometric IDs, and he feels a profound sorrow for the next generation.
He is driven by a singular desire to ensure that children born today do not inherit a world where every single transaction, physical movement, and private thought is permanently logged in a centralized database.
He is building the lifeboat, fully aware that most of the passengers don't even realize the ship is taking on water.
This has been an incredibly dense, illuminating journey. To briefly recap where we've been, we started by examining how the rebellious cypherpunk origins of cryptocurrency were co-opted by Wall Street liquidity.
Leading to a loss of basic fungibility, right?
We traced the inevitable scope creep of KYC regulations, transforming systems designed to catch spies and corrupt politicians into massive metadata honeypots that put everyday citizens at risk.
And we explore the uncompromising dark architecture of Monero and platforms like 0xNull.
Showing how zero-knowledge proofs and proxy routing allow for everything from decentralized lending to parimutuel prediction markets without leaving a single digital trace.
We analyzed the formidable entities operating on the global chessboard, from Palantir to the DoD, and dissected the rigid, solitary OPSEC philosophy required to build resilient, clean tech in a world entirely optimized for data extraction.
And so I want to remind you, the learner, whether you hold any cryptocurrency or not, whether you understand the granular mechanics of zero-knowledge proof or not, your metadata is out there right now.
It is being aggregated, analyzed, bought, sold, and inevitably leaked.
The invisible architecture of your digital life is being constructed around you every single time you click I agree to a terms of service update.
Which leaves us with a final, vital thought to ponder. Throughout this deep dive, we've explored the massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure built solely to verify who we are before we are permitted to transact.
Right.
But if the philosophies of developers like Steven eventually win out, if projects like 0xNull succeed, and perfect cryptographic privacy becomes the default state of the internet, how will human society fundamentally reorganize trust?
That's a huge question.
If we can no longer rely on digital identities, permanent credit scores, or expansive metadata profiles to prove to a stranger that we are a good actor, will we be forced to interact purely based on the immediate, tangible value we provide to one another in the present moment?
We started today talking about physical architecture, the glass and steel buildings we can map with our eyes versus the invisible, highly surveilled digital structures we are forced to navigate every day. The developers and cypherpunks we talked about today are essentially handing you a sledgehammer and showing you exactly where those invisible walls are located. Whether you choose to pick it up and break through them, well, that's up to you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep questioning the architecture of the digital world around you.